This is DW News live from Berlin. In Russia, the Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin has reportedly been killed in a plane crash. Russian authorities say a private jet traveling between Moscow and St. Petersburg has crashed with no survivors. The mercenary group leader was on the passenger list. And India becomes the first nation to land near the moon's south pole. Its uncrewed craft touches down safely to cheers and celebrations just days after Russia's failed landing on the lunar surface. Prime Minister Narendra Modi calls it a success for humanity. I'm Gerhard Elfers, welcome. And we start with breaking news. Russian authorities say that Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin has most likely been killed in a plane crash. The mercenary group's chief was on the passenger list of a private jet that crashed en route to St. Petersburg from Moscow. Authorities say all 10 people on board were killed. In June, Prigozhin's fighters had launched an aborted attempt to take Moscow after taking over the regional capital Rostov-on-Don. The Wagner Group fought a brutal battle for several months to take the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. Now let's go straight to DW's Russia Bureau Chief Yuri Reshet, who joins us from Riga because DW is being banned from reporting in Russia. Yuri, what more do we know about this crash? Was Prigozhin really on that plane?
Well, the aircraft was flying over the village of Kuzhenkino, near the larger Russian city of Tver in central Russia. It's believed to have been a military aircraft belonging to Prigozhin himself. 10 people were killed, you said it, Gerhard, according to the Russian civil protection, 3 of whom are believed to be crew members, and one of the passengers, of the 7 passengers killed, apparently Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin. At least that's what Russian news agencies are reporting, with reference to the Russian aviation watchdog Rosaviatsiya. The plane was reportedly on its way from Moscow to St. Petersburg. A telegram channel which is close to Prigozhin, or was connected to him, reports that the crashed plane allegedly was shot down by Russian air defense. But this, as I said, is a single report from one of Prigozhin's telegram channels. There is no official confirmation of this information, Gerhard.
But it does not sound totally unlikely. Prigozhin did cross a line with President Vladimir Putin when he led that mutiny a few months ago. Could this be more than an accident?
Sure, it may well be that this crash wasn't a tragic accident. Why? Let's think who was Yevgeny Prigozhin so far. He started as Putin's cook, then later he was used as Putin's favorite for the Kremlin all over the world to fulfill military political tasks, let's say so, that is in simple terms to secure and increase Russian influence with weapons in Syria, in Africa and finally in Ukraine. So this person became very important for the Kremlin, so important that he was even allowed to act outside the law. He recruited, for example, Russian prisoners for his mercenary force in Ukraine. Those men got freedom for fighting for him in Ukraine, first of all at Bakhmut, you said it, without a court, without a presidential decree. So this person, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was allowed very much more, one day became so powerful, obviously, that he became extremely inconvenient for the Kremlin, and on top of that he started criticizing the defense minister, the Russian tactics in Ukraine, and he even dared publicly and very loudly to doubt the sense of the war.
Now, the Wagner Group, it is a kind of a center of gravity, if you will, in the Russian apparatus there. Should he really be dead, where does that leave the Wagner Group?
Well, I think that it's clear that the days of Wagner Group or Wagner Prigozhin group is now counted. We don't know what will happen to this group now, but I can imagine that it will no longer exist as a fighting force. Many of the former soldiers have signed the agreement with the Ministry of Defense. It may well be that the days of the Wagner mercenaries are finally over now.
DW's Russia Bureau Chief Yuri Resheto there. Thank you very much, Yuri. Now, as we've been hearing, Prigozhin led a short-lived rebellion in June against Russia's conventional army. Thousands of mercenaries took up weapons and marched from southern Russia towards Moscow with the aim of toppling the country's military leaders. The mutiny ended with a deal. Here's more now on what was the most serious challenge ever to Vladimir Putin's system.
For a few hours, it looked like Yevgeny Prigozhin posed a real threat to Russian President Vladimir Putin's hold on power. The world watched in suspense as Prigozhin's Wagner mercenary group seized control in Rostov-on-Don, one of southern Russia's biggest cities, and then advanced north toward the capital, Moscow. Then, several hours later, Prigozhin suddenly called off the operation. He said he wanted to prevent bloodshed and that his intent was never to overthrow the government. Right up until the mutiny, Prigozhin was seen as a loyal ally of the Kremlin leader. After serving a prison sentence for robbery, Prigozhin worked his way up to a successful restaurant owner in St. Petersburg, earning him the nickname Putin's chef. Eventually, it led to catering contracts for the Russian government. His next business venture was quite different, though. Founding a private militia known as the Wagner Group in 2014, the same year Russia illegally annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Prigozhin also established a media group, including a troll factory. The United States and other countries accused it of trying to interfere in elections. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine faltered, Prigozhin began hiring thousands of soldiers, including convicts, to fight in Wagner units, aiding the Kremlin's war effort. Their perhaps biggest triumph was taking the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut after months of fighting in which Russia's regular army had been unable to prevail over Ukrainian forces. But as Prigozhin found himself more and more in the spotlight, he used it to rail against Russia's military leadership and its conduct of the war, including the accusation it was not providing his mercenaries with ammunition. Prigozhin's feud with the civilian leadership escalated when he refused to let his fighters be put under Defense Ministry command. And so Prigozhin launched what he called a march for justice.
We came here to put an end to the disgrace of our country. This here is a first step. What we're doing is right. It's to save Russia.
In Moscow, a shocked Vladimir Putin called it treason, a stab in the back in the middle of war.
Any internal turmoil is a deadly threat to our statehood, to us as a nation. This is a blow to Russia, to our people, and our actions to protect the fatherland from such a threat will be tough.
With his mutiny aborted, Prigozhin left Rostov-on-Don to cheering crowds. But the weekend of chaos had left a precarious future for himself and his Wagner empire. In the days that followed, President Putin embraced his supporters, trying to project strength after Prigozhin's extraordinary challenge to his rule.
The leaders of the BRICS group of nations say they've agreed on how their alliance should expand. They're holding a second day of talks in Johannesburg, where South Africa announced consensus on new guidelines for the group's growth. No details have been released yet. The heads of government of Brazil, China, South Africa and India, as well as Russia's foreign minister, are also using this summit to demand changes to international institutions and using a currency other than the US dollar to reduce Western economic dominance. The group has set itself the goal of increasing the political clout of countries from the global south in international affairs. Our correspondent in Johannesburg, Diane Hawker, earlier summed up what the BRICS leaders have been discussing so far.
Well, we know that the BRICS leaders, Gerhard, met last night for what they called a private retreat. And one of the topics that was under discussion was whether or not they should include a new BRICS member. I think that has been one of the most vocal or publicly spoken about topics within BRICS, although we know that the leaders are also discussing other issues such as trade amongst themselves and areas of cooperation. The issue of whether BRICS should be expanded is definitely something that most people in the media and others in other parts of the world are waiting to see a decision on. We thought that there would be a press conference today, but it seems like that press conference is actually likely to take place tomorrow, indicating that the discussion is quite heated and that there are quite a lot of topics and issues for the leaders to consider, particularly what should they be looking for within a new member. We know that there are differences of opinion on how that approach should be taken, and the foreign ministers are meant to have submitted a report to the leaders that gives an idea of who's applying and what they could potentially be bringing to the table.
Diane Hawker there reporting. India's space agency is celebrating the successful moon landing of its Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft. Viewers in the control room erupted into cheers as the landing module touched down. It is the first ever landing on the moon's unexplored South Pole. India's Prime Minister watched the landing remotely and celebrated in a rather modest fashion. A solar-powered rover will now explore the uncharted lunar region for the next 2 weeks. India's success comes just days after Russia's Luna 25 craft crashed into the moon. And just after the lunar lander touched down, Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed it as a historic achievement.
India's successful moon mission is not just India's alone. This is a year in which the world is witnessing India's G20 presidency. Our approach of one Earth, one family, one future is resonating across the globe.
To Zimbabwe now, where the Electoral Commission has announced that some voters in the country's general election will be able to cast their ballot past the deadline after it was marred by delays. Voters complained of having to wait for hours after the polling station opened late. In the capital, Harare, less than a quarter of polling stations opened on time. The Commission says that voters in line at 7 p.m. local time will still have their ballots counted. Incumbent leader Emerson Mnangagwa from the ZANU-PF party is seeking a second term. He's being challenged by Nelson Chamisa, who is also making a second attempt to become president. DW correspondent Privilege Musvaniri joins me now from Harare. How is voting going?
Voting is almost about to end officially because constitutionally it says voting starts from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But you find that there's been a lot of challenges with some polling stations not having voting material for the last 10 hours until this evening. So there are a lot of frustrations. Voters are still waiting to get to vote. You find that you'd see elders, people with disabilities, those who are chronically ill, are still waiting to cast their vote, and some had to go back home.
DW correspondent Privilege Musvaniri there reporting from the capital, Harare in Zimbabwe. And that's it from me and the news team for now. Phil Gale will have an update with all the latest on the possible death of the Wagner chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And don't go away now. Up next, we have the doc film with a story on people trafficking in Mauritania. I'm Gerhard Elfers. Thanks for watching.